Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Cube Tuesdays. So, we talk a fair bit about Cube on this channel. It's probably about time that we actually got around to making one. So the plan is that this will be the first episode in a series where basically I build a cube. The idea is that I'm going to go through the whole process so that anyone who wants to build their own cube can follow along, and then by the end you'll have everything that you need to build a cube. As this is the first episode, basically we'll be giving the overview of everything that you need to consider before you start picking any cards. Basically, this episode is going to be laying all the groundwork that you'll need to actually go ahead and build your cube. Because in the next couple of episodes, we're going to be moving on to things like picking your cards, filling in any gaps. We're going over things like refining the cube, actually buying it, picking up all the bits, and then obviously playtesting and upgrading your cube. So if you like the sound of that, do make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you get notified when those videos come out. But let's jump in with the first little bit. Basically, if you clicked on this video, you probably already know what a cube is, but we will give the quick TLDR just in case anyone isn't aware. Basically what we're doing is we're building our own draft environment. The first thing that you need to do when building a cube is basically narrow down and pick the type of cube that you want to build. There are tons and tons of different options out there, but we'll try and give you everything you need to help trying to refine it down so you can kind of get a good idea of what you're going to be building. This will also help you find similar cubes online. There's some good resources out there. Places like CubeCobra are fantastic places to find similar cubes. So basically this is the terminology to help describe what you're going to be building. The main place to start is with power level. So when describing the power level of a cube, there's certain ways that generally people describe cubes. You have things like powered, unpowered, vintage, legacy, modern, standard, peasant, pauper, and budget. A powered cube will contain the power 9, super fast mana, and things like Soul Ring. Powered cube is generally where you play all the most broken things. People will most commonly know of this because of the Mitgo vintage cube. Next, you have unpowered cubes. These are similar power level of cubes to powered, but you don't have specifically these super high powered cards in them. So they might still have cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor and Grizzlebrand, but they don't have the super broken fast mana like your Moxen or your Soul Ring or your Black Lotus. A vintage cube is basically using any card that's legal in vintage, which is quite a lot of them. Legacy is all the cards legal in legacy. Modern is all the cards legal in modern. I think you can tell where we're going with things like standard and pioneer cubes. We also have things like peasant, which is using only cards ever printed at uncommon. And then obviously you also have pauper, which is using every card ever printed at common. Those are the most common types of cubes out there, and those are generally the things we're going to be using to describe and build the cube in this series. But any setting you can think of, you can make into a cube. Some of the most common ones are set cubes. With a set cube, you're basically trying to replicate the draft environment of a certain set. If that's something you want to do, we do have a video on building a set cube. We use the Lord of the Rings set as an example, but everything in that video you can apply to any set out there. Links to that will be down in the description below. There's also things like multiplayer cube. I've seen combat matters cubes, tempo cubes, combo cubes, monocolored cubes, or 3 colored cubes where you only use 3 certain colors of magic. If you can think of it, you can probably build a cube of it. So that's the power level of the cube. The next important thing to work out is what size of cube that you're going to build. Some of the most popular sizes of cubes are 360, 450, 540, and 720, but there really isn't a limit or a firm number here. There is normally a minimum, and that's basically how many people you're expecting to draft with. The most common draft number is 8. That's just because the math of the round works out really easy. You don't need to do an app to do it. And that's kind of what limited magic is generally made for nowadays anyway. So for 8 people, the minimum number of cards you need in a cube is 360. That's because 8 players getting 3 packs of 15 cards each adds up to 360 cards. You always want to make sure you have enough cards for your drafters. You don't want anyone being left out. In terms of what size you should choose, basically that's up to you. Smaller cubes have the advantage, firstly, that they're cheaper because you're buying less cards, you're buying less sleeves, the deck box is smaller, all that kind of stuff. There's also generally less admin involved because you have less cards to keep track of and swapping it out, all that kind of thing. Also, smaller cubes tend to be more powerful because the draft environment is more condensed. Things like 2-card combos work way better when every card is being drafted. The flip side of that is with smaller cubes, you tend to get less diversity. Basically, if you're drafting a 360 cube with 8 people, every card is going to be drafted every time. So while it won't happen all the time, people will end up with very similar decks. The bigger the cube, the more variety in just cards that you can have in there, and also the more variety in archetypes. You're probably still going to be running the most powerful 360 cards, but when you go above that, there's more room for some flex slots. The other thing with bigger cubes is that it's also easier to try and test new cards. And also, obviously, with bigger cubes, you can fit more players in it. If you have a 720 cube, you can fit 2 pods of 8 into that. But then obviously, the bigger the cube, the more expensive it is. You're buying more cards, you need a bigger box, you have to look after more sleeves, all this kind of thing. It is more admin. So that is something you do need to consider when you're building your cube. When deciding what size of cube you should go for, my general bit of advice would be, at a base level, firstly, make sure you have enough cards to cover all the drafters that you're regularly expecting. Most draft environments are aiming for 8 people, so that's why I would recommend at a base level, you go for 360. After that, it's basically how often you're expecting to be drafting this cube. If you're going to be drafting it every month or every kind of 6 to 8 weeks, then maybe the lack of variety from a smaller cube might not be the end of the world. If you think there's a chance you could be drafting this cube a lot, that's when you're maybe looking at the 540 mark. That's the thing, this video is more intended for people who are starting out in cube. And to be honest, getting 8 players regularly for a cube draft isn't always the easiest thing in the world. But a cube somewhere in size between 360 and 450 will still work pretty well with 6 or so drafters. So all of that is kind of like the overview of what your cube is going to be. For the cube that we're going to be building along with in this series, what we're going to be building is a legacy power level cube, but a budget one. The legacy part gives me access to a load of cool cards. The budget part means I can put it together nice and cheaply and with cards that I already own. I'm not going to set myself a budget, I'm just going to try and keep the cost down as much as possible. If a cube for like 100 quid or $100 or 200 quid or $200 is something people are interested in, do let me know down in the comments. It is something I could try and put together at some point in the future. In terms of the size of cube I'm going to be building for the channel, I do want some variety, but I already own a cube already, so this one won't get drafted as much as my regular one. So that's why I'm going to be going for 400 cards for this cube. The reason for me is that it covers 8 people. You're not guaranteed to open every card, which is something I do like. And also from a cost point of view, it's only slightly more expensive than a 360, and also packs of sleeves come in 100, so this kind of seems like a nice round number for me. 400 is going to work for what I want from this specific cube. That doesn't mean you should copy that, go from the guidance that I've already laid out in the video. Find the number that works best for you. The next thing that you need to work out is basically an outline of what the cards in the cube are going to be. In terms of starting point for that, what cards do you like? What cards does your playgroup like? What do people enjoy? How do you like playing Magic? How does your playgroup like playing Magic? These are things to consider. Because once you've thought about that, you can then start working out what archetypes you're going to run in your cube. By archetypes, I'm basically saying these are the decks that your drafters are going to be drafting and then playing. If this is your first cube, by far the easiest way of doing this is by working out a different archetype for each different color pair. So Azurius, Dimir, Rakdos, Gruul, Selesnya, Can You Tell I'm Reading, Orzhov, Izzet, Golgari, Boros, and Simic all have something individual that those colors are trying to do. Especially if your playgroup is coming over things from limited draft, this is what people have come to expect from most modern sets. Now, most modern sets are based around each color pair having something to do. You'll have things like signpost gold cards that kind of lead people in the right direction. But that's not the only way that you can do it. You can do archetypes in like 3 colors. Think of sets like Khans of Tarkir or Streets of New Capenna. These have archetypes in all of your different wedges or shards, I guess it is as well. And then you build your deck in 2 or 3 of the colors. The finer way you can kind of lay out your cube is definitely the trickiest, and it's something we'll get onto probably in its own video altogether, and that's when your archetypes aren't really based in color pairs at all. This is something you see way more in like high-powered level cubes, like the Modo Vintage Cube, where you have things like monocolored decks, you have white aggro, you have red aggro, but you also have green ramp, and that's combined with things like Reanimator, which can be in black-blue, or black-red, or even black-green. It has land decks that are in multiple colors. It has blue-based good stuff decks, which can be blue and any other color. Those type of cubes are much more built around like packages of cards that synergize well together, rather than broad sweeping archetypes. These kind of cubes are very tricky to build, especially if it's your first one. Also, people who are new to playing cube, it's also harder to draft and harder to play. Like, there's really no training wheels with this kind of thing. We'll definitely try and cover that aspect of things in a later episode in the series. For the cube that we're building for this exercise, we're going to start with 2 color pair archetypes as a base, and then we might add a couple of different packages in as we go along later on. Another thing to consider when it comes to picking your archetypes is to keep in mind picking archetypes that kind of can fit into the general styles of deck that you generally see in constructed formats. By that, I basically mean make sure you have a control deck, make sure you have a tempo deck, make sure you have an aggro deck, make sure you have a combo deck potentially, make sure you have a mid-range deck. Think of those different decks as kind of like a Magic version of paper, rock, scissors. One is good against one, is weak against another. If you keep those different sections strong, it means that you're not always just going to have one fixed format where one deck is always going to be the best. In terms of finding the archetypes, in terms of finding like the idea of the cards that you want to go in, there is no end of resources out there for you to look at. If you've done pre-release or you've played any matches on Arena, what type of decks have you enjoyed playing? If you're coming to it from Commander, what types of Commander decks do you like playing? Like me personally, I've always loved graveyard synergies. There's a high chance we're going to be putting a graveyard synergy in this cube that we're building. Because it's something that I like, and I'm building it, and I think it's cool. That's one of the best things about Cube. You really can make it your own. A little bit of advice for when actually planning out your archetypes. What I always tend to do is draw this little pentagram that you see on the back of the Magic card anyway. Like, I will draw it out with white, blue, black, red, green, and draw all the lines between them. You end up with something that looks like this. Basically, this is a nice little diagram that you can then start filling in your archetypes. Just draw on the lines what you want those colors to do. By drawing out the pentagon, basically, you'll have a visual guide to how things will interact with each other. It'll also help you potentially link archetypes together in your cube. Like what I've seen a lot of people do is having like +1/+1 counters in white and green. So if you know a line going into white cares about +1/+1 counters, that's something that white can then do. So I've seen people combine that with things like modular, which also cares about +1/+1 counters. That kind of added level of synergy is really cool. It isn't at all something you have to be hard and fast with, like everything doesn't have to synergize with everything. Doing that is actually more of a headache than I can even be bothered to think about. But all the best draft environments, all the best cubes, all the best limited sets, like think of all the ones that people love, like Khans of Tarkir or Innistrad or Original Dominaria. All the pieces kind of fit together nicely, and that's kind of what you're looking for with your archetypes. If you're looking for inspiration for archetypes, we've done a bunch of videos on them on the channel, so do check those out. This is generally what I'm going to be doing in between this video and the next one. Because in the next video, I'm going to be talking about the archetypes that I have chosen for my own budget cube. I'll talk about why I picked them, and importantly, I'll also start showing how we can find cards for them to make them work in a cube environment. That process you will be able to apply to your own cube. Please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and that you like this video so you're notified when the next one in the series comes out. I have kind of just realized I've just given my YouTube audience homework, which is not the intention. I love you all. Thank you all very much for being here. Until next time, I will see you all soon. Goodbye.